Hello, and welcome to Wednesday at Bear Branch, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. We are now rebroadcasting the study of the fourfold gospel compiled by Brother J. W. McGarvey, taught by Brother Brian Barrett, who preaches for our congregation here at Bear Branch in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We hope that you will find the lessons profitable in the study of God's Word and enlightening to the Christian walk. Brother Barrett has been a preacher and teacher in the Churches of Christ for over 40 years, a frequent speaker in gospel meetings, revivals, having worked in TV and radio, and now our internet ministry. You may obtain a copy of Brother J. W. McGarvey's The Fourfold Gospel at our website, www.thechurchesofchrist.life, on our Fourfold Gospel page. You may use either the online copy or download the volume from this site. Both are free to use. We now invite you to open your Bibles and the Fourfold Gospel. Follow along in our lesson of the hour. Now, here's Brian.
It's good to be back and to continue in our study of the Fourfold Gospel. We're going to pick up last week where we left off. We were discussing the division of Herod's kingdom and his son, who was in the division of his kingdom among his sons. And tonight, as we continue, I want to pick up a question was asked last week about why it was that they went into Egypt. And I didn't really think about it until later, but we remember that Joseph and Mary went down to Bethlehem for a census in order to be taxed. And so there was a record of at least their appearing there. I don't know whether Jesus would have been included in that or not, but there was at least some record of Joseph and Mary who were there from Galilee. And so if someone said that, there was a man here by the name of Joseph and Mary and they were from Galilee, it would have been just a matter of looking back through the tax records to see that where they claimed to be living or from. And so it may very well have been possible to backtrack that and to go searching for him up in Galilee. And so if they did try, or if they would have tried to backtrack the information that was picked up on the census, along with whatever someone else may have told them, by them going into Egypt, if anybody did go up to Galilee looking for them, what happened to the man and woman that was here? And well, we really don't know. They went down to Bethlehem for the taxation, but they never returned, and I don't know where they went. And so from that point on, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. And so that's my final answer, at least for right now, as to why it is that they went into Egypt. As we're looking, we're in section 15, the latter part of section 15. If you're in the book, if you're following along in this.
Do you know if Herod, what did he actually die from? Die from horrible death.
I don't know. I don't have that. I don't have it here, and I don't really remember what it was. My guess would be that God was paying him back for the things that he did with the infants, because it seems to have been closely connected and tied.
He had a stench about him, so people couldn't stand to be around.
Well, I mean, he was not somebody that you really wanted to spend a lot of time with, because anything you did, that put you at odds with him, be afraid to pick up the wrong eating utensil and offend him or whatever. And it's almost like the queen off with their heads. It's King Henry VIII. All of those rulers have a tendency to be pretty testy when things don't go their way. So again, last week we were talking about the vision that Joseph had, and he came back into the promised land, the Holy Land. And as he was doing that, he was warned again in a dream not to enter into Bethlehem and that area. And so he, according to what is stated here, in Luke's account says they returned, and then in Matthew's account says he withdrew and came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth. And then Luke's account of this, as you see the little C there, is it was their own city. And so this is where they originally came from, and coming back into the Holy Land. Having been warned of the angel of this, they returned back to their own city rather than entering into Bethlehem or anywhere that was connected with that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, that he should be called a Nazarene. And so there is various interpretations of the word Nazarene, both figuratively, literally. There are some various places that are there. In some uses and forms of the word means branch or sprout, and therefore there are some prophecies that pertain to that, and there are some that are listed here. And so it's also used for that which is lowly and despised. So either one of those would be a fulfillment. We know that there was to be a branch of Jesse, a descendant of David. And so in that sense, as a branch, he was an offshoot of Jesse. And also, again, in Isaiah 53 and other places, we know that he was rejected, despised, and of course, even Nathanael, when they said they had found the Messiah and he was Jesus of Nazareth, said, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" And so even the city seemed to have a reputation of being a lowly town, one that did not have a lot of reputation even, and this area in here it discusses some of that, but of course what we would think of as the old southern tribe or the southern kingdom of Judah, and incorporating Jerusalem, these were the ones who were perceived to be sometimes the better Jews. They were the ones who were perceived to be more accurate in their following of the customs and traditions of the Jewish people. And Galilee is known to have been a place that was multicultural, I'll use it that way. There were many Jews there, and of course Jesus' ministry was among the Jewish people, and he spent a lot of time in Galilee, around the Sea of Galilee. There are also many towns and communities that were Gentile in origin that were there also. And so it was Galilee was more of a sort of melting pot, more of a Greek influence in Galilee, as there was more a Hebrew influence in the southern kingdom. And so that may very well have led to the people from Galilee being looked down upon. In the scriptures, we also know that there appears to have been some difference in the dialect of the speech that the people from Galilee had versus the people of Judea. And I don't know exactly what that is, but for anyone who's been to Ohio or New Jersey or whatever to the north and comes back here, you know that there is some definite differences in the accent. And so, again, they are the same way with us. They know you're not from around here, are you? And they may not know where exactly we're from, but a lot of times they'll say, you're from the South. Our language betrayeth us. And so it was much the same. And by Joseph and Mary going back to Nazareth, it doesn't seem to have been one of those Meccas that was just a wonderful place. It was a very humble place, a place where Joseph could raise his family in some seclusion. And of course, as the years pass by, as the years pass by, even those who knew of the things that the angels had spoken of became fewer and fewer. Those who were there, who witnessed him in Bethlehem at his birth, the Magi who had been there as we come upwards into Jesus' life. When you go 12, 15, 20 years, a lot of those individuals would have been either very old or they would have been perhaps even deceased. And so as he grew up there in Galilee, fewer and fewer people knew of any, great things that he was supposed to do. We know that Mary and Joseph understood that, and Mary kept it in her heart. And so the period of time from their returning to Galilee, the Bible really doesn't have much to say until we get up to Jesus at 12 years of age. And so some time has passed, and that's where we're going to go into in section 16. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the return of the family to Galilee? It was there that Joseph would have picked up his living. It is there that he would have taught his sons to be carpenters. And under the tradition of that time, most of them would have at least learned to be carpenters. They may have done something else, but in keeping with the customs or traditions. And so as we come into section 16, about Jesus living in Nazareth and visiting Jerusalem on his 12th year. And so now, Brother McGarvey puts this at probably about 7 or 8 AD. Since Jesus, we know, was born somewhere between 4 and 6 AD. As we add to that, we come up to about the 7th or the 8th year of the common era, in the life. We've made comments about that. Luke, the 2nd chapter, verses 40 through 52, is what we're going to be looking at in this section. As we begin in verse 40, it says, "And the child grew and waxed strong, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And his parents went every year to Jerusalem at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days as they were returning, The boy Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and his parents knew it not, but supposed him to be in the company. And we're told they went a day's journey, and they sought for him among their kinfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they returned to Jerusalem seeking for him. And it came to pass after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And they saw him and were astonished. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I sought thee sorrowing. And he said unto them, How is it that you sought me? Knew ye not that I must be in my Father's house? And they understood not the saying which he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he was subject unto them. And his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and stature and favor with God and men. And so we do not have a lot other than the birth of Jesus, the return, and our next peek into his life really is at the age of 12. And in Jewish customs and traditions, especially of this day and age, and it goes back a ways, I don't know how far, but usually around the age of 12 or 13, the Jewish male, at least at that time, was deemed to begin a more in-depth understanding of what it meant to be a Jew or to be an Israelite. You know, today we talk about the supposed age of accountability. And of course, a lot of that depends on the ability that one has to comprehend and to understand what's going on. But in the Jewish way of doing things, when a young man reached about 12 or 13, he was expected to take on a better understanding. And so we might say that from birth to around the age of 12 or 13, they were sort of considered children. And so when we hit the age of 12 or 13 in Jewish customs and traditions, it's one of those things where, son, you know, you've got to be more responsible for yourself and responsible to the law. You know, we have tried to bring you up and to teach you the things that you needed to know. And now, you know, you need to start, as we would say, have your own relationship with God. You know, for children, they live under their parents' relationship with God as they tutor them and as they bring them up in nurture and admonition. But when you start hitting around the teenage years, as we know, there's lots of changes and lots of things going on. And, you know, as you begin to move into that realm and to advance and to age, to become an adult, not only do you need to deal with the physical things that are going on, but you also need to be responsible more for your actions. And so we have this quiet time, so to speak, of Jesus, and then we have this age. Today, in the customs of the Jewish people, those who follow after the more strict way of doing things, the young man, when he reaches about the age of 12 or 13, he has what is called a bar mitzvah. And the bar mitzvah is a celebration of his coming of age to where he is now responsible under the law. And bar means son of, and mitzvah means law. And so he becomes a son of the law. he becomes a child of the law. And so he must learn how to interpret and to work with the law and to mold his life to be faithful to God. Those are part of the expectations, and those customs and traditions, I'm sure, go back a considerable way. In the more modern day, not wanting to leave the girls out in Jewish customs today, in many of the what we might call progressive synagogues, they have for the young ladies a bath mitzvah. Bath means daughter of, and so they have a bath mitzvah for her to acknowledge her becoming a daughter of the law. And so in both cases, they become responsible. And it's interesting that it's around this time that Luke gives us a peek into the life of Jesus, that he goes down there. We're told in verse 40 here, as we look at that the child grew and waxed strong. I would imagine, being the son of a carpenter, some of us, I didn't grow up on a farm, but my grandparents had one. I've listened to my mom and my uncles and them talk about it. And, today we're still trying to get the 12-year-old to get out of their bedroom and get away from the Game Boy or whatever they're playing, Xbox, whatever the system of the time is. Back then, when you were old enough to, if you're old enough to pick up a rock, then you're old enough to pick up that bucket and feed the chickens, or you're old enough to get out there and do something. If it's just pick up or pull up the weeds. And of course, part of all of this is Joseph was teaching him to be a carpenter. And if, I think most people to some extent or another have done some kind of carpentry work. And when you're lugging and tugging boards, and if you can imagine building a house with a hand saw and a hand auger and no electricity, and I imagine that was back when they didn't have the cheap white pine wood. I'm sure it was good and solid. And so everything from carrying his father's tools to doing whatever his father and mother asked of him, it says that he waxed strong. He grew and as an adult, coming into 12 years old, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And so while we don't have a whole lot of specifics, we have a good solid general idea of what's going on. Jesus' ministry is still 18 years away. And so he's not, he is the Messiah at this time, but he's not the Messiah either. He's the son of Mary and Joseph. And so he is subject to them, as we'll see, and he's growing and he's learning and what it is to be human, what it is to be a son, what it is to be raised by parents, to submit oneself to them. And one of the things that we see here in verse 41 is, and his parents went every year to Jerusalem at the feast of Passover. Now, we know that the men were accountable to God to appear 3 times. They had to appear at the Passover, the day of Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. The women were not obligated to any of these. The father, as representative head of the house, was obligated, if he lived there in the Holy Land, to go to Jerusalem for these feasts. Women could go, but women weren't required to go. And so we see that the custom of Mary and Joseph was that the family went up to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. Now, I don't know what they did at the other 2 times, if Mary and them went or not, but the Passover is if I was going to say that Passover is the big one, everybody has a big holiday. In every culture, there's always one day that just kind of seems to be the day. I mean, the celebration. It's the one that people tend to look forward to. This took place in the Jewish calendar in the first month of the new year. And so Hanukkah, the season of lights, which was back in November, December, closed out the year of their festivals. And then the next one would be in March or April, which was Passover. And so through the winter months, there was not all of this traveling. And as I said before, in seeing here his parents going down to Jerusalem, this was a huge reunion of the people of Israel. And we'll see that as we get down in this. But you didn't get in the family car, station wagon. You didn't load up all your kids in the station wagon and take off down the road. That's just not the way it worked. And the way that people did is that friends and family and all that were from Nazareth, they would all get together. And of course, most of the traveling was by foot. And so having all their chores caught up and everything took care of that needed to be, there was a set day that people decided that we're going to go up to Jerusalem. And that's in height, not necessarily north, south, east, west. Up and down is more about the height from sea level. But as the people left, they would leave by families. A lot of times there would be groupings of families. If you live, and I'm just using this as an example, but if you lived in Nazareth and your brothers and sisters lived there and their families, you would decide, part of their custom was, what day do we want to leave to go to Jerusalem for the Passover? And they would make arrangements. And part of those arrangements, of course, would be for some food for the trip and different things. And we're going to need some money, and we're going to have sacrifice, and we have to buy a lamb when we get down there. So they'd already planned for a lot of this, but they just get all those preparations together. And then as families, if they didn't have family, they were neighbors. And so if you didn't have family per se, you might join up with another family or people in what we would think of as the neighborhood. What day are you all leaving to go to Jerusalem? They had to be there the day preceding Passover to get everything ready for the Passover, but how soon they got there before and what day they left and how long they took to get there, well, that's, there's always the father who today throws their kids in a station wagon and it's like, y'all better go to the bathroom before we leave because we ain't stopping until, we run the whole tank of gas out. We're just going. And then there's the parents that every little thing they've got to stop and look at it. And, there's that quaint little place we usually eat. We got to stop there. And so it varies. And so this is why perhaps in the midst of all of this, we see Luke and the Holy Spirit bringing up these kind of things. As the custom was, his parents and with that, his family would go up to Jerusalem each year for the feast of the Passover in a courting. And we're told that he was 12 years of age. Now Luke tells us that this is when he was 12 years of age. And so that brings us back to the concept that he is reaching a point where, he's growing up and now people are going to be expecting bigger things. I in a way, I am somewhat envious of the Jewish people in the sense of the concept of the bat mitzvah, the bar mitzvah and the bath mitzvah, in the sense that there is a place where, there's a line that you say, son, daughter, you're not a child anymore. You're becoming a young man, you're becoming a young lady. You have to be responsible, and so we're going to hold you more responsible. As a child, we may have, kind of winked at a few things, but now we're calling you to repentance. Now you're going to have to be accountable. And so we're kind of at this place when we get a peek at Jesus. And so he's grown up and he's strong and he went up with them. And it doesn't necessarily, somebody have a question? It doesn't necessarily mean this is the only time he went up, but we're just specifically looking at this 12 years and the situation that took place there. Now, the Feast of Passover is an interesting feast because there's really two feasts that are kind of sandwiched together. We have the Feast of Passover, which really is about killing the Passover lamb and preparing the bitter herbs and all the things that go with that, and having the people stay up at night and going through the Passover observance, singing songs, prayers, customs, eating, all of that, talking about their journey out of Egypt and connecting them with their past as a people. And so there is that Passover, but bumped up to that is also the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because they had to have unleavened bread for the Passover. And after the Passover, there was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so we're looking, you add Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you're looking at about an 8-day celebration. And so we're not just talking about going down to Jerusalem then for an overnight stay or whatever, but we're looking at being there for a week or so. And like I said, depends on when you get there. I can hear some fathers say, if we don't leave now, we're not going to get a good room. We're not going to be able to find a good spot. We're not going to be able to do this. We're not going to be able to, people, the language may change, the dress may change, but people are still people. There's the wife who has to drag her husband out. Honey, we got to go. We've got to go. You've got to quit, lay that down, and we've got to go. And so this was a opportunity in many ways for Jesus, because as his custom was, we'll see, he went into the synagogue every Sabbath day. And he worshiped with his parents. We'll see that later. But he didn't get to go to the temple every Sabbath day. Where they lived in Nazareth, you had to go down around Samaria, through Samaria, whatever, and go down to Jerusalem. This isn't a journey that you can just jump on a train or whatever and make. And so Jesus has an opportunity to go down to the temple and be there at the temple and engage there at the temple. And as I said, it's a big family reunion. All the Jews are cousins. And so, like anything else, you see people you haven't seen for a year. The women get together, the men get together, then the court of the women, the court of the women were there, the court of the men. It's worshiping God, but it's also, getting together and having a Passover meal together and engaging in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Just a lot of different things. And so when those days were fulfilled, those 8 days, and Brother McGarvey says 1 day for killing the Passover, 7 for observing the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I heard a brother once say that they ate leftovers for a week. Now, that's not exactly what's going on here. His view of it was like Thanksgiving. You have all that food and you have a big dinner, and then you end up eating leftovers for a week. Well, that's really not the way it works. It wasn't a lot of leftovers and that kind of thing, but it's still part of that remembrance. besides the thing that happened with the Passover, there was the journey with Moses out of Egypt, and that journey involved taking with them unleavened bread and eating unleavened bread on the journey until they got to Sinai and the things that took place there. So they were there for 8 days, and, like any other thing, I can remember, going to Dayton or going to Cleveland or going up to Michigan with my cousins, and, all the family would get together, and, Dad would give us some money, and we'd take off to the local grocery store and get candy and bubble gum and pop and chips and all that, and we'd run around and play all day, and they would get to sit and talk. And I can imagine, the same kind of thing going on. The kids together. Can I go with so and so? Can we go up to the temple together? Can we do this? Can we do that? Sure, go ahead. And so there were kids that came together there with their trip, and others that they met and saw there. And so during that 8 days, while there was structure, there were certain places you had to be at certain times. There's also a lot of freedom. However, with Jesus, it seems that his attention was to the things of the temple and what was going on there. And as we look at this and think about it, after the Feast of Unleavened Bread was finished, then everybody would have their tiers. We've all done it. We went to visit family, and we've spent a few days together, and it's time to go home, and there's tears in your eyes, and there's the hugging, kissing, squeezing. We'll see you again, there, whatever. And so the time comes to leave, and just like everything else, they came as a group, and they went home as a group. Part of that was for the logistics. Part of that was also for protection, that there were known to be thieves, robbers, others around. Wild animals, not a lot, but I'm sure there were some. And so there was strength in numbers, and another reason that they traveled together. And so they went on the journey with the company going back to Nazareth in that direction, and we're told that they went a day's journey. And of course, the kids were together, and everybody's traveling, so you do your thing. But as you come to the end of the day's journey, we have to figure out where we're going to sleep, and supper and eating and all those items that go along with that. And so at the end of the day, they can't find Jesus. They had supposed that he had been with either their kinfolk or an acquaintance, which would have been from Nazareth. And when they found him not, they returned to Jerusalem seeking for him. Now, any parent who has even temporarily thought they've lost a child, yes?
It says here that it's a 20-mile journey back.
A day's journey would have been close to 20 miles, and that's a hike. That's a hike.
Quite ways.
Of course, at that day and age, that's the way travel. People were a little bit healthier than me anyway. And so that, I'd be lucky if I could walk 5 miles in a day, but yeah, a day's journey would have probably been anywhere from 15 to 20 miles, somewhere around there, depending on how fast you traveled, how many kids you had, all the things you had to do. So, it's one of those, you can't just, turn around and buzz back. It's you made that journey, and now you got to make that journey back. But the interesting thing in verse 46 is, where do we look for him? You have to go back and think about where all the kids were that he was maybe what we would think of today, playing with, hanging out with, whatever. You go from house to house, place to place. He has to eat, he has to sleep somewhere. Where is he? And so they look for him, and it took them 3 days. Now, Brother McGarvey says that by 3 days it means portions or parts of days were counted as a day. So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday had to be 3 days. They again, I'm just using that as an example, but he wasn't there Tuesday. They went back into the city, and so they couldn't find him Tuesday, they couldn't find him Wednesday, they found him Thursday, and it was 3 days, and they found him in the temple, probably in one of the various places where the Jewish leaders, the rabbis, would meet with their disciples. People would come to the temple. Solomon's porch was a place where both the Gentiles as well as the Jews could listen. There were people who were the doctors of the law that would come and sit and teach and answer questions and do all the kind of things that we think about. And so they found him, it says, sitting in the midst of the teachers. And it says both hearing them and asking them questions. Now, you want to be put on the spot. Let Jesus ask you a question about the law. The Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. And so you have Jesus there in his temple, and he's asking the teachers questions about the law, an interpretation of the law. And of course, we know that the Pharisees had the oral traditions and customs that they applied and thought of as the law, as well as the written law. And so Jesus and them had lots of issues over this later on. But now he's just a 12-year-old boy asking a bunch of questions, and they're trying to answer his questions. And when they find him and heard him in listening, that says they were astonished. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Why in the world would you do this? This is not you. Why would you deal this way with us? Why did you not go home? And he says, behold, or she says, behold, thy father, the legal father, we've already discussed, is Joseph, and I sought thee sorrowing. I can't imagine, what, a mother and father would, just can't find them for a few minutes. You're in a panic. You're at the front of the store on the PA, calling their name, come up to the front of the store, mommy's waiting on you. I can't imagine looking for 3 days and not finding him, the panic that they were in. And so he gives them an interesting answer. He says, how is it that you sought me? And he says, know ye not that I must be in my Father's house? And some of the translations say about my Father's business. And it says they understood not what he was talking about or saying, but we're told that he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he was there with them, and he again was subject unto them. This is not a rebellious teenager who acted up at 12 and stays. This isn't about acting up or rebelling. It was about being about his Father's business. And this takes us right back to where we would expect in Jewish customs and traditions someone of the age of 12 or 13 reaching what we today would call the age of accountability, and therefore we ought to be about our Father's business. And Jesus especially needed to be about his Father's business, learning. But nonetheless, his mother kept all these things in her heart, contemplating what they might mean. And of course, I'm sure that she also was holding the other information she had got from the angel when he was conceived and when he was born and all the various. And so we really don't know what happened after that, but whether there were any more visions, dreams, or whatever after Joseph brought his family and they went back to Nazareth. Was it quiet for 12 years that they really just went about their business? We really don't know. But here at in Luke's count, we see that this is one more thing that Mary especially put in her heart, in her thoughts, mulling over that, trying to figure out what the end result of all of this would be. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. We're told that he grew in favor with God in seeking to keep. At the age of 12, you have to, you're now old enough that you're going to have to be responsible. God is expecting you to be responsible. And so what Luke is telling us is Jesus was. He grew in favor with God. And as we're going to see, his custom, he was in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And it says he grew in favor with God and men. And so his reputation among the community there at Nazareth was good. He was seen, as we many times would think of, as a good boy. He minds his parents. He works hard with his father. He does all the things that he needs to do. That boy's going to make something of himself someday. And so that's kind of the way of looking, at that.
A little bit confusing that said that they understood not.
Well, they didn't understand the full impact of what he meant about being in his father's house or being about his father's business. Joseph was his father. I mean, you got to understand, for 12 years, Jesus has been the son of Joseph. And so when he says he be in his father's house or be about his father's business, the first thing you would think of is he's referred to Joseph as his father or his dad all these years. And so, when he says he has to be about his father's business or in his father's house, they think, well, Joseph's house, your father's house in Nazareth. I don't, but apparently they didn't go into a lot of a discussion. They listened to the answer that he gave them, and I don't know the type of woman Mary was, but I can, Mom many times would ask a question, why did you do that? And I'd answer. And then, you would get a look, that look, mom's look. Every mom's got one. She'd give you that look and like, let's go. And at that point, you knew the discussion was over and, it's time to go home. And so, I at least in my mind, I see Mary, as a mother question her son, why would you deal this way with me? And he's like, well, didn't you know I ought to be in my father's house? You've been looking for me. I'd be in my father's house and about my father's business, depending on the translation, how you want to look at that. But, it's then, what just says he went with them down. But again, like I said, I like to just think of Mary giving him that Mary look. That Mary look that moms have. And it's like, moms have that look. And as a kid, you're not very smart if you don't learn to look. When you went too far, and when there's not going to be much more arguing. And so he went down with them. The interesting thing, and again, Brother McGarvey points that out here, is he grew in stature and favor with God and man. He grew physically, grew up, but he also grew in favor with God and man. And this is interesting, and Brother McGarvey points it out. When he was a boy, he was able to get along with the scribes and Pharisees and, the people there. He was just little Jesus. or young Jesus, or however they looked at him. And so he seemed to get along with the people there in Nazareth and the synagogue all quite well. But once he starts his earthly ministry, once he begins to hold people to a harder line, and once he really begins to take on the persona of the Christ, and he becomes the teacher, and he becomes the leader, and he's going to be the Savior, this is when he begins to be at odds, as we've been studying in the book of John. And this is when he begins to be at odds with the Sadducees and the chief priests and all those, as he begins to make disciples for himself.
Thank you again for listening to the lessons today. We would encourage you to visit our website for more learning opportunities. There is much to do and see. www.thechurchesofchrist.life. May God bless you. Until we have time together again.